They sent a woman to command the grave, and the man who ran it thought it was a joke. In the end, the only thing buried was his pride. She was a ghost long before she arrived at Tartarus Station, a whisper in a secure file, a name with no face attached. When she finally stepped off the deep earth elevator, she was less than a whisper. She was silence. He had expected a warrior, but he got a scholar. He had wanted a soldier, but he was given a geologist. And in the crushing dark, a league beneath the sun, he learned that the most dangerous thing in the world was a quiet woman who understood the rock. The air in Tartarus Station had a taste. It was the flavor of immense pressure, of recycled oxygen, of ozone from the humming server racks, and of something ancient and mineral. It was the taste of the Earth's mantle, 1,000 kilometers of solid rock pressing down from above, a constant, silent scream that vibrated in the bones. Dr. Eris Thorne felt it not as a threat, but as a medium. To her, the silence between the groans of the station's superstructure was not empty. It was dense with information, a library of seismic whispers. She stood before the core resonance chamber's primary monitoring wall, a sweep of holographic light that displayed the station's lifeblood. It showed geothermal stability, gravimetric distortions, and the faint, almost undetectable hum of the planet's core. Others saw numbers and graphs. Eris saw a symphony. Her fingers moved over the cool, light-projected console, not typing, but conducting. She was calibrating the deep strata geophones, a task of such delicacy that most of the station's technicians considered it a form of esoteric art. She was tuning them to listen for a specific frequency, a resonance pattern so subtle it was lost in the background noise of planetary existence. Her focus was absolute, the low, rhythmic thrum of the station's life support, the distant clang of a maintenance droid, the clipped conversations of the comms officers. All of it faded into a uniform hum. Her world was the silent song of the deep earth. She wore simple gray fatigues, devoid of rank or insignia, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot. She was an anomaly in this place of rigid military hierarchy, a civilian contractor whose purpose was understood by few and questioned by many. She was the geologist, the rock whisperer, a quiet fixture who seemed more a part of the station's sensitive equipment than its human crew. The quiet shattered when Major Kalen Vance arrived. He did not walk, he marched. The sound of his polished boots on the grated metal floor was an act of auditory aggression, a percussive announcement of his own importance. He was a man carved from the regulations he worshipped, his jaw set, his uniform starched into geometric perfection, his presence a disruption to the station's delicate equilibrium. He was the commander of Tartarus, a post he considered both a high honor and a deep insult, a dead-end assignment in a tomb, far from the real wars being fought in the void above. His tour of the command center was less an inspection and more a territorial display. He barked questions at technicians who flinched at his volume, his voice a blunt instrument in a room built for whispers. His gaze swept the room and landed on the one person who did not react to his entrance. Eris. She remained perfectly still, her attention fixed on the holographic display, her back to him. She was an irregularity in his perfect, ordered world. A civilian, a woman. In his command center, near his most sensitive equipment, without so much as a glance in his direction. The offense was total. He strode towards the resonance chamber, his shadow falling over her workstation. "This is a restricted area," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber's acoustically designed space. Authorized personnel only. Eris did not turn. Her eyes traced a cascading line of data, a faint tremor originating somewhere in the Tonga Trench, thousands of miles away, yet as clear to her as a voice in her ear. She made a minute adjustment to a filter, isolating the signal from the planetary background noise. Vance's irritation hardened into anger. He stepped closer, planting himself directly beside her console, forcing himself into her peripheral vision. I am speaking to you. This is a military installation, not a university rock garden. I want your name and your authorization for being in my command center. Her fingers stilled. She finally turned her head, her gaze not rising to meet his, but resting on the insignia on his collar. Major, a mid-level administrator, given a task far beyond his comprehension. Her eyes were a cool, placid gray, as old and unreadable as the stone around them. Dr. Eris Thorne, she said, her voice quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the ambient hum of the station with unnerving clarity. It held no deference, no fear, only the flat tone of stated fact. The lack of a respectful "sir" was like a spark on dry tinder. Vance's face tightened. Doctor, I don't care if you have a doctorate in galactic history. This is my station, and you will address me as "sir." Now, your authorization? My authorization is level prime, she replied, turning back to the console. The tremor from the trench was resolving into a complex waveform. It was not natural. It was too clean, too rhythmic. It was artificial. Vance's mind snagged on the term, level prime. Such a clearance didn't officially exist in the standard military hierarchy he knew. It was a designation from ghost stories, from the blackest of black projects, something no one at his pay grade was ever supposed to encounter. He dismissed it as arrogance, a civilian trying to sound important. He felt his authority being subtly undermined, and he would not tolerate it. He needed to put her in her place, to re-establish the rigid order she was disrupting with her quiet defiance. He smirked, a condescending twist of his lips. He saw her simple, unadorned fatigues, her complete lack of military bearing. This was his territory. This was his language. I don't recognize that designation here. In this station, everyone has a rank. It clarifies the chain of command. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl meant to intimidate. So, let's make this simple. Say your rank, Doctor. The question hung in the air, a public challenge. Several technicians nearby paused their work, their attention drawn to the confrontation. This was the moment of humiliation, the reassertion of the natural order. Eris did not answer immediately. Her focus was entirely on the data streaming down the holographic wall. The artificial tremor was not just a signal, it was a carrier wave. Something was moving through the planet's crust, using the natural fault lines as a conduit. It was moving fast, and it was moving towards them. The symphony she had been listening to had just introduced a new instrument, one that played a note of pure, impending violence. Her response to the Major, when it came, was not for him. It was a simple statement of fact, a byproduct of a much larger calculation happening in her mind. That is not a relevant metric, she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment Vance was stunned into silence. She hadn't just defied him, she had deemed his entire worldview, the very concept of rank and hierarchy that defined his existence, as irrelevant. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. He opened his mouth to roar, to have her dragged from the command center and thrown in the brig, to strip this arrogant civilian of whatever specious authority she thought she possessed. He never got the chance. The first wave hit without warning. It was not a sound. It was a violation. The very atoms of the station seemed to lurch sideways. A deep, grinding groan tore through the superstructure, the sound of a mountain being ripped in half. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the command center into absolute darkness, instantly replaced by the terrifying blood-red glow of emergency lighting. Alarms blared, a cacophony of shrieking sirens that signaled a catastrophic failure. The floor bucked, throwing men and women from their stations. Vance was slammed against a bulkhead, the air driven from his lungs. It was a seismic event, but like none he had ever experienced. It was not the rolling motion of a natural earthquake. This was a punch, a single titanic blow delivered to the station's foundations from deep below, as if a god had struck the planet with a hammer. Through the chaos, Eris remained standing. She had braced herself a microsecond before the impact, her body reacting to the data on her screen before her conscious mind had even processed the threat. The holographic display had died, but she did not need it. She could feel the resonance in her teeth, in the marrow of her bones. It was a frequency she had theorized, but never encountered. A resonance torpedo. An enemy weapon that didn't use kinetic force to destroy, but harmonic vibrations. It was designed to find the unique resonant frequency of a target structure and shake it to pieces from the inside out. It was elegant, terrifying, and brutally effective. The initial shockwave passed, leaving a legacy of screaming alarms and panicked shouts. "Damage report!" Vance roared, staggering to his feet, his authority a fragile shield against the encroaching terror. What was that? A reactor breach? Sergeant Eva Rostova, the station's senior communications tech, was already at her post, her face illuminated by the red glow of her console's emergency power. "Negative, sir, not the reactor. It was an external impact. A seismic event, off the charts. All primary comms are down. The main fiber optic conduit to the surface has been severed. We're cut off." "Impossible," Vance snapped, clinging to protocol as the station groaned around him. "This station can withstand a 9.7 earthquake. Get me engineering. I want damage control teams on all levels." His training took over, a rigid set of procedures for a crisis he could not comprehend. He was issuing orders to fight a fire when the threat was a flood. A second, less violent tremor shook the station, accompanied by the high-pitched screech of tearing metal. A status report flashed on the main tactical screen. "Sir," a junior officer called out, his voice trembling. "Hull integrity failing in Sector Gamma. The primary adamantium shell is fracturing." Vance stared in disbelief. Fracturing? The shell was 10 meters of solid reinforced alloy, designed to withstand the pressure of the planet's mantle. It couldn't just fracture. "Seal it off," he commanded. "Weld the bulkhead shut. Contain the breach." "Sir, welding won't work," Rostova interjected, her voice tight with urgency. She pointed to a diagnostic schematic on her screen that showed a spiderweb of micro-fissures spreading through the station's framework. "It's not a single breach. The entire superstructure is resonating. It's like a tuning fork. Whatever hit us, it's shaking us apart on a molecular level. Standard damage control is useless." Vance whirled on her, his fear transmuting into rage. "Are you questioning my orders, Sergeant?" "No, sir. I'm stating a fact." It was in that moment of systemic failure, of leadership collapsing into blustering denial, that Aris moved. She walked from the darkened resonance chamber into the center of the chaotic command deck. She moved with an unnerving calm, a small island of stillness in a sea of panic. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, making the scene hellish. No one noticed her at first. They were all looking at Vance, waiting for an order that would save them. They were looking at the wrong person. Eris stopped at the central command console, the nerve center of Tartarus Station. It was locked down, displaying only emergency status alerts. She placed her hand on the screen, her palm flat against the cool surface. A small biometric scanner near the edge glowed faintly. It flashed green. With a soft chime, Vance's command-level lockout vanished. Full station control access bloomed across the screen. Vance saw it. "What are you doing? That's my console. I'll have you shot for treason." Eris ignored him. Her fingers flew across the controls, her movements a blur of economy and purpose. She wasn't accessing damage control or communications. She was pulling up schematics for the station's seismic dampening grid, a system designed to protect sensitive experiments from natural earth tremors. It was a defensive system, but it had never been envisioned as a weapon. Sergeant Rostova watched, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. She was the only other person in the room who understood what Aris was attempting. The seismic dampeners were tied directly into the station's geothermal power core. To reroute them, to change their function on such a fundamental level, while the station was in a state of resonant cascade. It was like performing open-heart surgery during a lightning strike. "Sir," Rostova said, her voice low and urgent, her eyes fixed on Eris. "Major, you need to listen. She knows what she's doing." "She's a civilian playing with my station," Vance bellowed, starting towards Aris. "Stop her! That's an order!" Two security guards moved to obey, their expressions grim. But Rostova was faster. She moved to block their path, placing herself between them and Aris's console. It was a stunning act of insubordination, a complete break from the chain of command. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Look at the resonance cascade readouts. We have maybe 3 minutes before the entire station liquefies. His way," she gestured with her head toward Vance, "is protocol. It's death. Her way is physics. It's a chance." The guards hesitated, caught between the screaming major and the calm sergeant. In that moment of paralysis, the allegiance of the crew fractured. Authority, which moments before had been absolute and vested in the rank on Vance's collar, began to flow away from him, drawn by the quiet, terrifying competence of the woman at the console. He was shouting into a vacuum. No one was listening anymore. They were all watching Eris. A new timer appeared on the main screen, counting down from 90 seconds. Below it, a complex energy schematic was forming, lines of power being rerouted from life support, from secondary systems, from every non-essential function of the station. She was gathering power, starving the station to feed a single, desperate gambit. "What is that?" one of the bridge officers whispered. "What's the countdown for?" Eris answered, without looking up, her voice a detached, clinical instrument. "The second impact." A cold dread settled over the room, thicker than the emergency lighting. A second one? The first had crippled them. A second would atomize them. "She's lost her mind," Vance breathed, his face pale. "She's going to get us all killed." But his words lacked conviction. He was a spectator now, a relic of a former hierarchy. The real commander of Tartarus Station was a quiet woman in gray fatigues who was preparing to fight an earthquake with the station itself. Eris was not trying to reinforce the station against the second blow. She was not trying to deflect it. Her plan was far more audacious, bordering on the insane. She was preparing to catch it. The entire station, from its adamantium shell to its geothermal core, was a single, massive instrument. The first torpedo had rung the station, revealing its fundamental resonant frequency. The second torpedo, Eris calculated, would amplify that frequency to a catastrophic, shattering pitch. But if she could modulate the station's own energy field, if she could retune the seismic dampeners to oscillate at a precise harmonic counter-frequency at the exact moment of impact, she could do something that defied conventional physics. She could absorb the weapon's energy. She could capture the lightning in a bottle, and then she would send it back. Her plan was a symphony of destruction played in reverse. The resonance weapon traveled through the Earth's crust along specific geological strata, fault lines that acted as natural wave guides. It was how the weapon could be fired from halfway across the planet with such precision. Eris had tracked the incoming path of the first wave. The second would follow the same conduit. Her countermeasure was to turn Tartarus Station into a massive transducer. She would absorb the energy of the second impact, amplify it using the station's own geothermal core, and then release the entire payload of raw power back along the same path, a seismic echo of unimaginable force. She was going to use the enemy's bullet to shoot them back. The final seconds of the countdown ticked away on the main screen. 10. The station groaned, the resonant vibrations from the first impact building again, a prelude to the finale. 9. Eris's hands made their final adjustments, her expression as serene as a monk in deep meditation. 8. Sergeant Rostova stood by her side, monitoring the energy flows, her face a mask of terrified concentration. She had staked her career and her life on this woman. 7. Vance watched, his mouth agape, the full terrifying scope of her plan finally dawning on him. 6. The lights flickered as Aris drew the last reserves of power into the dampening grid. 5. A profound low hum began to build, a note that seemed to emanate from the very rock. 4. It was the sound of the station tuning itself. 3. Every member of the crew braced themselves, gripping consoles, railings, anything solid. 2. Eris's fingers left the console. The work was done. The equation was balanced. 1. Now. The impact was not a vibration. It was an event of pure energy. A silent, white flash filled the command center as every system overloaded. For a timeless instant, the station ceased to exist as a solid object and became a vessel of pure, screaming resonance. The hum rose in pitch to an unbearable shriek that was felt rather than heard, a sound on the edge of perception that vibrated the soul. The force of it pressed everyone against the floor, a physical weight of impossible power. It felt like the end, and then it was gone. As quickly as it had arrived, the energy vanished. It was not dissipated. It was released. A deep, seismic thud, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant, echoed up from the depths beneath the station. It was the sound of a counterpunch, a wave of pure force being fired back into the planet's crust. Then came the silence. It was a silence more profound and absolute than any the crew had ever known. The shrieking alarms were gone. The groaning of stressed metal was gone. Even the background hum of the station's machinery was gone, every system having been momentarily overloaded. In the dead quiet and the deep red gloom, the crew of Tartarus Station slowly picked themselves up. They were alive. The station was intact. The vibrations had ceased. On Rostova's console, a single emergency-powered monitor flickered to life. It displayed a global seismic map, A red line, representing the energy Aris had just unleashed, was racing away from their location, following a subterranean fault line across the Pacific. It traveled for several seconds, a blazing indicator of unimaginable power. Then, at a point somewhere deep in the contested territories of the Mariana Archipelago, it stopped. The point of termination flared into a brilliant, star-like symbol. A new seismic event was registered, a massive one, magnitude 10.4. An event so powerful it would rewrite geological maps. It was centered on a set of coordinates that corresponded to a suspected deep Earth enemy weapons platform, or what had been one. The threat was neutralized. The enemy was annihilated. The checkmate was absolute. Into the stunned silence, a new sound emerged, a faint, crackling hiss from the comm station. Rostova's head snapped up. It was impossible. The main conduit was severed. No signal should have been able to get through. But this wasn't coming through the main conduit. This was a different kind of signal, broadcasting on a frequency that was purely theoretical for this station's equipment. It was a deep-range quantum entanglement channel, a form of communication that bent the rules of spacetime, a system reserved for the highest echelons of command. The hiss resolved into a voice, preternaturally clear and laced with the cold authority of absolute power. Tartarus Station, this is High Command. General Marcus Thorne speaking. Report status. Over. The name hung in the dead air. Thorne. Major Vance, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, seemed to snap out of his stupor. It was a lifeline. High Command. A chance to reassert his control, to frame the narrative, to salvage his career from the wreckage of his pride. He stumbled towards the comms panel, pushing past a stunned technician. He grabbed the receiver as if it were the crown of a kingdom he was about to reclaim. "General," he barked into the mic, his voice raspy. "General, Major Vance here. We were attacked. A new form of enemy weapon. The station is crippled, but the situation is under my control. The civilian, she interfered with critical systems, but I managed to stabilize." The general's voice cut through his transmission, shearing it off like a hot knife through wax. The tone was not merely cold, it was glacial. "I have the telemetry, Major. I have the energy readings. I have the seismic playback. The only thing you appear to have had under control was your own ignorance." A pause, heavy with menace. "I will hear the report from the person who actually saved that station. Put Dr. Thorne on the line. Now." Every head in the room turned. They looked at Vance, frozen with the receiver in his hand, his face draining of all color. Then they looked at Aris. She was standing calmly by the central console, already running diagnostics on the station's battered power grid. The name, the connection they had all missed, now clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. Thorne. Aris walked to the comm station. She did not grab the receiver from Vance's hand. He simply let it go, his fingers numb as she approached. She lifted it to her ear. Her voice when she spoke was the same as it had always been, calm, factual, and devoid of triumph. "Aris here." The general's voice on the other end lost its arctic edge, warming by a fraction of a degree. It was the subtle shift from a commander addressing a subordinate to a mentor addressing a prodigy. "Report," she gave it to him. It was a masterpiece of brevity and precision. She detailed the nature of the resonance weapon, the frequency it used, the method of its delivery through lithospheric waveguides. She described her countermeasure, explaining the physics of turning the station into a harmonic transducer, the power requirements, the calculated energy release of the reflected wave. She concluded, analysis of the reflected seismic event suggests a catastrophic structural failure at the weapon's point of origin. Hostile source is neutralized. Tartarus station is stable but operating on tertiary power. Structural integrity is at 47%. We are holding. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The entire command center held its breath. Then the general spoke again. Your analysis is confirmed, Iris. Orbital assets registered a subsurface energy release at the calculated coordinates that exceeded anything we have on record. We are classifying the enemy asset as gone. Well done. Another pause, this one shorter, colder. The general's voice returned to its previous icy tone. He was no longer speaking to her. Major Vance. Vance flinched as if struck. Sir, he whispered, his voice barely audible, you are hereby relieved of command of Tartarus Station, effective immediately. You will be confined to your quarters under guard to await transport to the surface. A board of inquiry will convene to determine the full extent of your incompetence. Your actions and your failure to recognize the nature of the asset under your protection endangered a multi-trillion credit facility and its entire crew. Is that understood? Vance could only nod, a pathetic, jerking motion. He tried to speak, to muster some defense, but no words came out. Sir, the senior ranking officer? He finally managed to stammer, a last desperate appeal to the rules that had failed him. By regulation, command falls to me. The general's response was the final, crushing blow. Your personnel files must be regrettably incomplete, Major, or perhaps your reading comprehension is wanting. Dr. Eris Thorne holds the title of Strategist Director for the Special Projects Command, Division of Asymmetric Warfare. A civilian title, yes, but one that carries with it an equivalent military rank for operational purposes. A rank I personally authorized. The line went quiet for a beat, a silence crafted for maximum impact. That rank is Lieutenant General. The shock in the room was a physical thing. Lieutenant General. It was a rank that commanded fleets, that advised planetary governments. It was a rank of almost mythical authority, and it belonged to the quiet woman in the plain gray fatigues. The general's voice came one last time, a quiet, deadly stiletto of a sentence. So I suggest you find your voice, Major, and I suggest you show the proper respect. Now say her rank. Major Kalen Vance stood in the ruins of his career, in the center of the command deck he no longer controlled. He looked at Eris, who had already turned away from him, her attention back on the long, slow work of saving her station. Her back was to him. She had already forgotten he existed. He opened his mouth, and a dry, rasping sound came out. He swallowed hard, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He couldn't say it. The words were ash in his throat. Sergeant Rostova stepped forward, her face impassive. She took the receiver from Eris's offered hand. He understands, General, she said quietly. We all do. In the days that followed, a new order settled over Tartarus Station. It was an order based not on insignia, but on intellect. The command center, once a place of tense, rigid formality, became a quiet, efficient workshop. Eris issued no loud commands. She made suggestions, asked questions, and drew complex diagrams on holographic displays. The crew, from the senior engineers to the junior maintenance techs, followed her lead without question. They moved with a newfound purpose, a sense of participating in something significant. They were no longer just soldiers manning a post. They were scientists and explorers, working under the quiet guidance of a master. They learned to read the station's groans, not as signs of failure, but as a language. Aris taught them how to listen to the rock. Major Vance was a ghost. He remained confined to his quarters, a silent, brooding presence that served as a constant reminder of the old way of thinking. When the transport finally arrived to take him to the surface, he walked through the command center in shackles, his gaze fixed on the floor. No one looked at him. It was as if he had already ceased to exist. His arrogance had been a loud, clamoring thing, and its absence left a profound and welcome peace. One cycle, during a long and tedious recalibration of the station's tertiary power conduits, Sergeant Rostova approached Aris. She held out a steaming mug. It was a poor synthesis of what was once called coffee, but it was the best the station's recyclers could manage, a gesture of respect. Aris took it without a word, her eyes still on the energy flow schematics. Rostova stood beside her for a moment, watching the intricate dance of light on the screen. She didn't offer praise or thanks. Such things would have felt small, inadequate. Instead, she asked a question that had been burning in her mind since the day of the attack. "The way you used the lithospheric waveguide," she said, her voice low, folding the energy back on itself to amplify the resonant payload. "All the texts say that's purely theoretical, a mathematical impossibility." Aris took a slow sip from the mug. The warmth was a pleasant, grounding sensation. She looked at the schematic, at the elegant, impossible solution that had saved them all. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. She gave a one-word answer that recontextualized the known limits of science. Was. Weeks turned into months. Under Aris's direction, Tartarus Station was not just repaired, it was reborn. She integrated her knowledge of resonance physics into every core system, turning the entire facility from a passive research outpost into a sentient defensive weapon, a fortress that was as much a part of the planet as the bedrock it was carved from. It was now truly untouchable. When the official refit and rescue crews finally arrived from high command, they found their work had already been done, and done to a standard that their own engineers could barely comprehend. Aris's purpose was fulfilled. The day of her departure was as quiet and unassuming as the day of her arrival. There was no ceremony, no formal farewell. She simply gathered her data slates, donned the same simple gray fatigues, and walked towards the deep earth elevator. The entire command crew was there, standing silently at their stations. As she passed, each one of them, men and women of the rigid military order, gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was not a salute to a superior officer. It was the silent, profound acknowledgement of a legend. She stepped into the elevator, and the doors hissed shut, leaving behind a story that would be told in whispers in the deepest, most dangerous outposts across the galaxy. It was a story about the quiet geologist who came to a place of darkness and taught its hardened soldiers that true power is not shouted from a position of authority, but demonstrated in the silent, flawless execution of an impossible idea. She left a lesson etched into the very bones of the station, that the most formidable weapon is a mind that can listen to the silence and understand its song. Her legacy was not in the regulations she rewrote, but in the paradigm she shattered. She was a ghost who had come and gone, but her presence would haunt the foundations of that place forever. A quiet reminder that in the face of a crisis, the only rank that truly matters is competence,